Ellie, we're in business. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our council meeting. And Roma Sands, would you like to come and open our meeting, please?
Gladly.
Lovely to see you again. Haven't seen you for at least a fortnight, or was it a month? I can't remember.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Mr. Chairman and councillors, Mahana Hana, Ana Na Mihi Kia Koutou. It's really good to be here, and thank you for the privilege. Let us join together in prayer. Loving God, we are here as community people, interested in the community, wanting to work our way through a business that will be of good outcomes for our community. And, I pray that we will deliberate and make decisions according to the best ends for this community, and with your guidance and care that can be done easily. Thank you, God, for being with us and guiding us in all that we do and all that we plan. Ask for your blessing on each and every one of these councillors here today making these deliberations. I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Roma. And I think it's one of the things I like about the meeting being opened in this way is the reminder to that we, for us to try and do our best to make wise decisions on behalf of the community. And it's a really nice, poignant start to the meeting. So thank you very much, Roma.
Thank you, Michael.
Right. We'll move to apologies. And so we have, do we have Councillor Belsky with us? We do have Councillor Belsky with us. Welcome, Councillor Belsky, on Zoom. Now we have apologies from Mayor Helen and Councillor Campbell, who are at a rural and provincial meeting on council business. So a special type of apology. And then our Chief Executive, Shane Harris, is there as well. And we have an apology from General Manager Francis Smorty. Any other apologies?
Mr. Chair, are you looking for someone to move that as a package?
There's no other apologies. Thank you, Councillor Casey. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Hatfield. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. Do you have any requests for leave of absence? Right, we'll move to the confirmation of the minutes. Minutes have been circulated. Do we have someone who would like to move that be approved?
Having moved that this one, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Casey, thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Marsh. Any comment? All those in favour, please raise your hand. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest into the agenda today? Racing through. Now we get to one of the best parts of the meeting, public forum. And it's my pleasure to invite Joshua Humphrey to the table. Come up and join us. And Joshua has been a recipient of a representative grant, and he's going to tell us about the New Zealand Division 2 swimming competition in Dunedin, I believe, back in May. So if I've got anything wrong, you'll correct me, but welcome, and we're really keen to hear from you.
He's pretty nervous, so give him a break. So they've got a bit of a presentation here, and then Josh is quite happy to answer some questions at the end, if that's okay, Josh.
Fantastic.
That's Josh in the Manawatū green cap. If you're wondering why he's got a fast cap on.
What's the hardest?
Maybe talk through that stuff, Josh. So it's obviously it's a pretty high threshold in order to get to the event, qualifying times, and the opportunities to actually qualify are probably one of the biggest challenges because of the effects of COVID and the limited meets leading up to them. The opportunity to actually get a time that's that meets the thresholds, one of the more difficult aspects of it, but he's performed outstandingly well over that period. He's a leader within the club itself, and you know, performed really well at a national level. So I'm just conscious it's Josh's time, not mine. So please, questions away.
Right, happy to open it for questions. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Joshua, well done. Just what's the Apollo? Go back a couple of the Apollo. Division. I don't think that's quite the terminology. I just want to know what exactly that was.
Oh, sorry,
that's okay. I'll just make it all difficult for everyone by asking a question.
So Apollo's the sponsor.
Yeah,
they sponsor at a national level,
right.
and you have what you call national age groups, and then the next tier down is what we call Division 2s.
Okay.
Now, national age groups are the kids that are generally pitching at national records, and then at a secondary school level below, they have Div 2s, which is a bit of a stepping stone. You quite often will find at the top of the Div 2s will migrate into the national age group champs as well. So they're a bit of a breeding ground for those that are sitting in that top 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
So generally, if you go to the national age groups, you're going there because you're in that upper echelon. You're probably in New Zealand development squad type levels.
Yeah.
And so this is the introductory to it, because the step from just base clubs to national age group is such a massive gap.
Yeah.
That there's this in the middle. So.
I just wanted to comment. My cousin Rihanna Feetham, who is deceased, unfortunately, she held the national title for butterfly, and I just wanted to acknowledge that butterfly is no easy discipline. So, well done. Yeah. Keep going.
which is your favourite?
Probably the 2 events that I did, which was 50 butterfly and 53. Yeah.
Which is your better one? About the same, probably.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Great, Councillor Marsh.
Joshua, well done. Couple of questions. One of the slides actually showed the stadium itself, the roof. Is it actually a removable roof, or is it a clear light roof?
So it just lets the light in.
Let's slide in.
Yeah.
It looked as though there was absolutely nothing there other than the structure for the ceiling.
Yeah, it's just like glass
Right.
on the ceiling. Yeah.
Good. And the water was all right being Dunedin?
Yeah.
Good.
It's cold.
Yeah. And what's your next step? Ambition.
Like more national events,
Yep.
like qualify for half. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you won't make this Commonwealth Games, but you might make the next. Is that where you're heading?
Yeah, exactly that.
Good as gold. That's fantastic.
Well done.
Thank you.
Great, Councillor Short.
Yeah, well done. And going all the way to Dunedin, that must have been pretty exciting.
Yeah, this time in the South Island.
Oh, right. Yes,
Yeah.
there's some nice photos of flying down there. What sort of level of training do you have to do to maintain that kind of level of fitness? How many times a week are you at the pool? And I suppose you go out something like 5:30 in the morning or something.
So I do Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and then some days I go to the gym to keep it up. And a lot of the weekends I have swim meets, like that's Manawatū competitive swimming. So
You really dedicate.
yeah,
All the best.
And I imagine it's pretty much dedication from family as well.
yeah, they're really supportive.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Any other questions, councillors? Well, congratulations on what you've achieved so far. We wish you absolute every success in the future. And it's our privilege just to be able to help in a small way. So thanks for coming along. Thanks for your outstanding presentation, really good, and for answering our questions. Thanks so much.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just a question. How does our Makino pool compare? When you're at a national meet and the likes of Dunedin, etc., is our pool here up to that standard?
Well, Makino's way better.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's great to know from our level, and the fact it's just what sort of facility we're operating here. So that's a great answer. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With elections coming up.
We could actually probably say that was a great question.
Mr. Chair, the media here today.
Yeah.
And we are, I mean, we recognise, that's why we put it here, we recognise we've got a pretty good facility. I think we have the same constraints and pressures that every swim club and every council across the country has, that when the season changes, and we've got a wonderful facility summer based, but when the season changes, there's a constriction of the space, and that's always a challenge. But probably the three bulk users, actually, we've worked together a lot. We're wanting to find a solution for the space that's available as well. And you've probably seen from your team at MAC that the attraction of Fielding as a location for a lot of the Swim Manawatū meets. There's a lot more meets coming this way than has been historically, which gives that utilisation over the weekend. And it's a great team over there. So from a club perspective, can't speak highly enough of the team at MAC.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that feedback. Once again, thanks very much, Josh. And well done.
Thank you.
That's right. That's all right.
We're going to have a presentation.
I'll take advantage and do the same.
Thanks, Roma.
Thank you.
You have a wonderful day. A presentation for Lachlan Crate that's been deferred, I believe, is coming next time. So, and then we are having a presentation from the Manawatū Community Committee, but they're at 9:45. So we'll just keep going because that's an hour away. So notification of late items, I'm not aware of any. Recommendations from committees, none. So we have the minutes from other committees for our information that have been circulated in the normal way, but there's an opportunity for liaison councillors to speak to those. Councillor G. Taylor, first one up is the youth.
Last one. It's the last one. First one.
Page 14.
Yeah, 13.
Manawatū Community Trust. I can talk about it, council, if you want.
Sorry,
It's all right. We'll get there together.
But I can see how you've done that. It's like, it's got the minutes here and then it's minutes from other committees. It's easy.
right, okay, right, yeah, I've figured out what I've done wrong, thank you. So Manawatū Community Trust Statement of Intent, Lynn and Michael. Michael, welcome. Come on up, join us.
Yeah, speak very quickly is the final statement of intent from Manawatū Community Trust. I just look up just to see yesterday. The final is no change from the draft. All that you've got extra is just the completed financials, which were missing from the draft. So that's all ready for your consideration.
Right, any questions? So before we go on, I will welcome our guests on Zoom. And I believe we have guests from the Manawatū Community Trust amongst them. It looks like MCT. So is there any questions from councillors? Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, folks there. You're actually quite small. You're way down there, but I'll give you a wave anyway. Thank you. I do see you. It's just a quick question, maybe just a refresher for my own sake. Just on page 22 of our agenda, councillors, I'm not too sure whether it's on yours, but it's the borrowing and debt repayment program. And it's just for the year ending of June for next year, it's the new borrowing of 3.6 million. And I just, sorry, folks, what was that for? Just a point of clarification through you, Tyson.
For the Corrick Court development.
Thank you. Right.
Plus some other catch-ups.
Yes.
So most of that's going to go for Corrick Court though.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, thank you so much for that.
Great. Any other questions, comments, councillors? Councillor Short.
Just one. In the trust's objectives, first of all, good morning. This is me here. I was just wondering, we all know that times have become a little bit more challenging and financial constraints for individuals in the community, and I'm sure particularly seniors and disabled. In your objectives, 2.1 is the promotion for the relief of poverty, and I wondered if there's anything new, any new initiatives that you've thought of in going forward, where perhaps we can help people a little more than what we are.
That's a good question, because we're trying to take an increased focus on that wellbeing aspect of our trustees, and we've just received our final report from the Massey University team, where we looked at what should we do with the senior hub, or what are the challenges facing seniors. So they've got a number of recommendations, and that we still have to absorb that report, but the next time we meet with you, we're happy to share that and set out what we would think we need to take forward on that. It's looking at things like, do you say for the senior centre there, is one hall sufficient, or do we actually need multiple locations happening there? And what are the pressures coming on in the ageing space? So it's good to have that bit of research. We're happy to share that once we've absorbed it a bit more.
Thank you.
Tyson, anything else that you'd like to share with us before we go to the recommendation?
I'd love to introduce our new general manager. You probably can't see because we're so far zoomed out, but we've got Teresa Haig here with us.
Hello.
Joined us 3 weeks ago and still with us. And she was also at the, we had a blessing for the new Cleverley wing. So that will become operational over the next few weeks. So we hope to have a public opening for that in conjunction with Fielding Health Centre. So that's another big achievement for us as well, and the community. There we go.
Welcome, Teresa, and we look forward to working with you. And yeah, that's an exciting step forward, isn't it, with Cleveland? So absolutely fantastic. Councillor Belsky.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. I'm just, have you factored in the increase in interest rates that seem to be coming down the barrel of our industries? Have you factored that in?
Yes, we have factored in an increase. And the way things are going, I may not have factored in enough of an increase for the next future years, but we certainly did. We anticipated a rise to around 5.5%. It may prove to be a little bit low at this, but yeah, that's what we used. Yeah.
If there's anything you can do to contain inflation, Councillor Bielski will be more than happy for you to.
Yeah, it's a bit scary coming down. I know you guys have got a good deal through the council borrowing, and I wish you all the best, but there's certainly the Reserve Bank seems to be stepping up the tempo a bit.
Very much so. We think we've got enough of a buffer there, but if it keeps on going, we'll just have to look again.
Yeah, true. Thank you.
All right, well, good question, good answer. Thank you. Anything else? Would someone like to move the recommendation on page 14?
Happy to move, Mr. Chair, that the council agrees to the Manawatū Community Trust final statement of intent 2022-2023.
Thank you, Councillor Hadfield, seconded by Councillor Marsh. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Contrary? Okay. Thanks very much, and thank you very much, Manawatū Community Trust, for your ongoing outstanding work for our community, and I mean that very, very sincerely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope we get a look around the new wing.
Right, we move to our Manawatū District Quarterly Economic Update. We welcome Stacey to our table. So Stacey's producing a lot of these reports and tweaking them for the appropriate audience.
Yes, and adding to them as well,
Adding
which I
to them
tend
as
to do, even in the morning.
On a daily basis.
A couple of minutes ago. Anyway, right, Morena, welcome to the quarterly update for March. Some really interesting times in terms of economic circumstances, so we'll get into it. Again, happy to take any questions or discussions as we go up this. Okay, so economic performance to date, we're going to discuss, and then we're going to look at the economic headwinds and then the economic outlook. Sort of changing the way I present a little bit to do so we look at the data and then the so what. So what does that mean for us? So changing it slightly as we did for the joint strategic. Can I move over here? It's just a little bit hard to see. No, it's okay, actually. Okay, so despite headwinds, the local economy continues to perform well in 2022. So we have really strong GDP growth. Our industry structure is dominant in that strong performance in terms of our public sector employment and also our food production in particular. Favourable export conditions are continuing, but as we know, there are substantial challenges. We've had earnings growth alongside record low unemployment. Now you can look at that as a good thing or a bad thing, the low unemployment. I tend to think at this point it's a bad thing. We just do not have enough labour to run our economy. Local consumers, because they are employed, are continuing to consume. And we've had very strong tourism expenditure increase to a 12% year on year to April. As we know, our housing market indicators are turning, so we're seeing quite a change there in the market, but it's not as dire as some of the headlines would suggest. Bloodbath, etc., is a little bit premature, those types of statements. We do really see that continued elevated need for affordable and public housing stock within our community. So I'll skip through this. Manawatū district GDP up 8.8% year on year, so that's the highest in the region. It exceeds, of course, New Zealand GDP growth at 5.2. Yeah, so we're all positive across the region, but Ruapehu, of course, because they're more sensitive or more exposed to tourism expenditure impacts, has had the biggest impact for our region.
Stacey, just before you leave that slide, has the method of measuring GDP changed in the last, say, 5 or 6 years?
The one thing that has changed is that they've updated the base year to 2020 versus it was 2010 prior to that. So it has changed in that sense, yes.
So in terms of the dollar figure, I remember sitting around this table, and I've only been here less than 6 years, looking forward to hitting the magic 1 billion.
Yeah.
And we're basically 50% above that. Is that?
That is correct.
That is correct.
That is correct, yes.
And you have to say that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, although I will moderate that, was saying that once they did update it to $2020, then it did jump up by about 200 million. So that was the difference between the real value in 2010 and the increases over that time versus 2020. So it is still performing well. I think we're about 1.457 billion roundabout. So we've jumped up about 160 million since we converted to $220. But we can have more, I can explain that more to you, the impact of that, if you like.
It's fine. It was just a general comment that even taking into account that the change, it's still very, very, very impressive in my book.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we're well beyond what we were before the pandemic now as well.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of the size of our economy.
Councillor Casey.
If I may, to interrupt the flow, just going on to the GDP, is our GDP regionally influenced by government spending? So in other words, looking at Ohaki's development as a case study?
Absolutely. I do have a bit of I put some information in the report around what drives GDP. It's a very simple calculation, the way I explained it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is having an influence. And in the Infometrics model, this is where this data comes from. Infometrics are the only ones that actually release territorial authority GDP data. Yeah. They look very closely at the construction investment for non-residential and residential construction. So that is one of dominant drivers there.
Thanks, Stacey.
Sure.
And I imagine that primary industries and related trades would also be keeping us right up there.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting, I was talking to the branch manager of EFCO last week, and she was saying how they're really struggling with staffing levels. They've still got a lot of sickness going through the plant, and they're cancelling night shift fairly regularly, so their production numbers are really down. And Andrew and I were just talking about the wait times for getting cattle into the works at the moment. So we actually could be in a much better position if we were, you know, everything was aligned. And this is what we're doing under constrained conditions.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right across the economy, and meat production is one of those areas that's heavily constrained in the supply side. But that's basically, we've got this really strong demand across the economy, but we've got constrained supply. Basically, it's very broad constrained supply from goods that we import to the things that we're producing here. So labour is part of that problem, absenteeism is part of that problem due to illness. So until we see those challenges, you know, the mismatch between supply and demand start to balance, then we're not going to, you know, then those inflationary pressures are going to continue. And that's the global challenge at the moment.
And also that puts pressure on employers, because Stacey and I were talking about the dairy industry the other day, that a lot of farmers are nervous about staff leaving at the end of the season and whether they can replace them. So instead, they've offered them really large salary increases or, you know, bonuses to keep them from moving on, because it's just so hard to find replacement staff, and until we are allowed the full complement of overseas workers like we had before, it's very challenging.
Absolutely. And once we see those wage growth really embed in, that's a really clear indication that inflation is also embedded. So those factors are having quite a strong impact on inflation, and will probably increase the impact of that on inflation.
So while the price is looking really good, the overheads, the break-evens actually hugely increased. So, you know, you've got to look at the difference between the two.
I've got a slide up there with regard to that, and thank you, Councillor Short, for that information you sent me. It's very helpful.
It is advertising.
So trade conditions, as we've just discussed, continue to be favourable for our local food producers. As we know, dairy and meat exports are dominant within this district in terms of our production, and they account for about 40.4% of the total value of New Zealand exports over the year to April. So as we can see, the increase in exports there over the year to April. So we're 19.7% up on dairy exports, 16.7% up on meat exports, and forestry exports also had a bit of a boost at that time as well. So that's positive considering the increase in costs as well. So here's a graph that was from last week's ASB commodity price report, which looks at the pricing in 2022 versus previous years. And as we can see, the pricing is pretty favourable for our meat producers. And again, a lot of that is global forces around limited supply of the product, and also maintained demand for proteins. So globally, protein foods that are proteins are less sensitive to price increases because they're a need rather than a want. So we see those prices holding up quite strongly internationally. Also had an 11.1% increase in dairy prices over that time. And they have come off in the peak back in March, and slightly those prices, but they're still very strong by historical standards. So our outlook for food producers, we've got record high export revenue as forecast for our food producers. We've had a volatile week on global markets. They're settling today after the Fed came out with their 75 basis point rise, which was expected. But we've had a bit of volatility there. But from the latest ASB commodity price reports, we are expecting export revenue to be record export even revenue going forward. Unfortunately, we do have those sharply rising costs. Of course, they've hit a 40-year high over the year to March. The Stats New Zealand and on-farm cost increases with 9.9 over the year, but Beef and Lamb have produced their own estimates at 10.7% per year for their farmers. And that's due to higher interest rates, of course, and those fuel, fertiliser and feed costs. So constrained global supply is expected to continue globally, which will support pricing for our food producers. We have some comparative advantages here in the sense that we're grass-fed, so we're not so sensitive to the increased prices for feed internationally, which will support us in terms of global competitiveness. And our prices are not expected to rise as much as they are in other countries use grain-fed products.
That's all I have, Phil.
Yeah, it's interesting, Stacey. I've, you know, when you consider the amount of media coverage you get now on anti-red meat and anti-dairy, it's quite amazing how well our red meat and dairy industry does. My understanding is the latest fad in Europe is a body of research going on at the moment. I understand that is trying to come up with a food labelling system that gives food a carbon score, for goodness sake. And you'll probably understand my initial reaction to that. But I think the interesting thing around that, if they actually get to that point, is that given we are one of the most carbon efficient producers of food in the world, it could potentially be quite interesting. As I say, my initial thought is holy moly, but it could actually be quite advantageous, because I think on a global basis, I don't think there's any doubt that if we do get to the point where, and Europe seem to drive a lot of these things, don't they? Whether it's getting rid of petrol engines and diesel engines, all sorts of stuff that they drive, I think without a lot of due consideration. But this one could actually potentially work quite well in our favour, because I do believe, I think globally we would perform pretty well. Depends, of course, on what sort of system they come up with to actually measure. I'm a great believer in the nutritional index, which looks at the nutritional value of food versus the carbon output, because not all food is equal. And when you are producing high quality protein rich foods for the world, then that has a greater value to global well-being than some other foods. So I'm a great believer in that. So the challenge would be actually, if they do something like that, is to actually get it right and have it meaningful. Yeah, Becca's proposing that. They're doing some research on that at the moment, looking at the nutritional index versus carbon output, which I think is a very good way and a sensible way of looking at it. Right, we'll advocate for that one. Yep. Just interestingly, from the information that Councillor Short gave me, which was from the Baker Ag presentation recently, they did an analysis of an on-farm cost, and the break-even cost per kilogram of milk solids for that farm was $8.75. So it's fortuitous that these costs or the revenue is increasing, or the commodity prices are staying high, because we actually need that to continue to be profitable with the increase in costs on the other side of the equation. So we'll obviously be keeping a closer eye on that, because those commodity prices need to stay high for our economy. So the low unemployment rate reflects critical demand for labour. So we're at 1.9%. I don't think this is anything to celebrate at all. We do not have enough labour to drive our economy, and that is a problem for us and across New Zealand.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to, and I highlighted in my notes, Stacey, that this is a real negative on the dashboard. This is the issue with the engine, as far as I'm concerned. I know in my little non-for-profit, we're short on at least 2 or 3 staff. It's holding us back financially. And I'm just wondering through the chair if this is something that Cedar's actually got a grasp on, or have got a strategy around it. Look, I'm sure they have, but I think it's worth highlighting maybe the next joint SPMP that we actually need to really ramp up bringing some people in. Not only that, not only the medical, but also construction industry, our dairy and rural folk, so the whole works, the whole gambit. I think the only one at the moment who might be doing any good at the moment is New Zealand Police, their recruitment. But anyway, that's sort of a real concern to myself as an elected member, is our super low unemployment.
It's driving inflation as well.
Yes, yeah. Oh, look, you'll be well aware of the spin-offs. Yep. Yeah. That's the case.
Yeah. As soon as we can get some more RSE workers in, the better, I think, for the whole country, for so many industries. But when it comes to our skilled labour shortages, where traditionally now that the borders are open, traditionally we've done recruitment drives in places like the UK and Canada and stuff. People are actually looking at the cost of living over here, and they're actually going, nah, don't want to go there. Adds extra pressure to us.
There is anecdotal evidence to suggest that because our immigration settings are still quite tight and quite risky, that's also putting people off. So we need to see, I think we need to see a relaxation of those ASAP to enable those workers to safely come in and bring their families, because this is a real problem. And I did, when I talked to the minister briefly at that presentation we went to, one thing that I was quite concerned about was that he was celebrating a 3.2% unemployment rate as sustainable, and I don't believe that to be the case, and I think it's causing a lot of supply side issues in this country and is driving some of that increase in costs as well.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh.
Just following on from the two comments there too, it's the absolute numbers that are staggering, and it was interesting listening to the guy from Managing Director from Simon's Transport the other night on TV, saying that just the transport industry alone, Class 5 licenses, 2,500 annually that they're needing just to go into that industry alone. It's staggering. And then the other part to that too is the fact, and I think there's 2 union meetings that are just currently happening at the moment as far as wage increases are concerned. They're talking a 21 and 23% increase. You know, how sustainable, when Councillor Casey makes his comment, for small industries and what have you to actually absorb those sorts of increases.
Absolutely.
And what that is then going to flow on and sorry, with inflation.
Yeah. I do have a slide on looking back at the first quarter labour cost index and the areas of the economy that have got the highest pressure. And I think that'll be worse going forward, in my view, because of those pressures. Right, looking at our work-ready job seeker, so a lot of our work-ready job seekers are exiting to employment, but numbers do remain elevated from what we had prior to the pandemic. So job seekers fell by 114, and that's 12.8%, so a slightly larger decrease here than nationally at 11.8%. Work-ready job seekers fell by 24% in the district. So we're seeing those workers being taken up into the labour force, which is positive, very positive. Job seekers with health conditions increased by 18. So we know that we've had very strong increases in that over time, especially since the pandemic. So that is levelling off a little bit, which is promising to see. The psychological and psychiatric conditions, which dominated the increase in health conditions, made up all of that 18 here in the district. So it was up 5.2% versus a fall of 2.1% nationally. So we still do have those pressures across our unemployed workforce. So that is an issue for us, but it does seem to be pulling back a little bit from what we saw earlier and I won't call it post-COVID because we're definitely not post-COVID, but sort of coming out of the lockdown and restrictions phase of the economy. So job seekers are down 117 across those aged 18 to 54, a slight increase in those aged 55 to 64. And I totally agree with Bobby's comments from CEDA the other day that we have a workforce there with our older population that we should be encouraging back into the workforce, even if it is for 2 days a week, to share their skills and knowledge and to train and educate new workers. So that's just my view.
There's only some that need to go back into the workforce. Well, I just think.
But they're a very good resource there that we could be utilising, in my view. So yeah, so job seeker benefits do remain elevated at 20.6% above what they were pre-pandemic, and that's a bit of an anomaly considering our unemployment figures, etc. But I guess it's the case of just because you've got people there that aren't working and available to work, it doesn't mean that the economy is actually demands those skills that those people have. So there's a mismatch there which is why they say maximum sustainable unemployment is around the 4%, because if we assume lower than that, we're assuming that everybody can do every job, and that's just simply not the case.
But there's not many employers that aren't after staff. There's got to be some job that's suitable for everyone.
Yeah.
If they were in India or Pakistan or China, they'd staff. And that's all there is to it.
Yeah. And there is some, with the job seeker data, although it says work ready, there are challenges to employment at times that need to, that do pose a challenge, I guess, to getting those people into those jobs. And sometimes employers actually don't want to employ people that have been unemployed for a substantial period of time, etc. So there are other challenges to getting more people into work. That is my phone, but I'm just going to that. So earnings rise, but the jobs data is actually quite mixed. So we've seen a 9.7% increase in earnings in the March quarter versus the previous March quarter. That's 9.3% for New Zealand. So those earnings increases are across the country, not just here. The number of employed residents increased by 537, but we actually had 225 jobs actually will not disappear, but not available in that period of time based on workplace address. So we've seen a really strong increase in jobs in Palmerston North in terms of workplace address, are up over 2,100 year on year. So they had quite a decline in employment over the pandemic period because of hospitality, etc., which wasn't able to operate. So I'm quite interested in this statistic because does it mean that our workers are choosing to go to employment somewhere else when we need them here? What is the nature of this? Why is this happening? So it does, we look at the annual figures because we're interested to see the seasonal effects. And when we see it down 2.4% from the previous March quarter, then that definitely inspires my interest a little bit. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And we've talked about the observations that you've all seen across the district of businesses needing workers. So that's clear indication that more labour is needed here.
If I may. Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure whether you've got a next slide or your comment, just in regards to that stubborn youth unemployment. To share on that today, Stacey?
I don't have the need figures, etc., in front of me. I can certainly look into that. But what we're seeing with certainly the job seeker data, which is a good indication, is that we're getting the biggest declines in job seekers in that age group. Yeah. So that's quite positive. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of that too is in those entry kind of positions in hospitality, etc., where those sectors are recovering now, as we've seen in Palmerston North with the business events sector. They're expecting record revenue in the second half of 2022 with the national level conferences, etc., that are being held there. So that will be pulling in labour. Yeah, so a lot of I'll get the statistics for you. They actually remain the same as what they were in the report. Okay. Yeah, so we only get quarterly updates on that.
Thank you, Stacey.
Yeah, but it's good to see. It's just at the moment we've got a bit of a closed system where the whole country is in need of labour. So we're just seeing labour moving from one place to the other in the country, and we're not seeing that inflow of labour that we need to actually supply labour demand across the board.
We're just shifting it around a spreadsheet.
We're just shifting it around, yeah, and that's causing further constraints and further pressures. So wage inflation is at highest rate since March 2009. Now, interestingly, healthcare and social assistance were up we're up strongly at 4.4%, but this is of interest based on what we were talking about before with truck drivers, etc. Looking back, machinery operators, drivers and labour is at the highest increase at 4.9%. So that's really, really strong. We don't usually see that kind of price pressure in those industries, but again, limited supply. And community and personal services workers are up 4.6%. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward with that. And see if those pressures rise further. I will note too that population growth here over the last 3 years has averaged 2% per year. So it's well above the national average at 1.5%. So we are seeing population moving into the district in that sense. Look at the housing market. Always interesting. It's not a bloodbath, really not a bloodbath. So the media is interesting. Anyway, okay, so annual house price growth does continue, but we're seeing softening short-term growth. So median growth continues to be positive, as we can see there from the chart on the right-hand side. However, average house price in the district did fall by 1.9% in the May 2022 quarter, and that's compared to 2.2% all across New Zealand. Lower quartile prices in the district fell by 4.4%. We could probably see that as a little bit of a positive unless you bought one of those properties in the last wee while with elevated prices, because I understand the pressure that puts on families. But in terms of affordability, that, it'd be interesting to see the impact of that over time. Upper quartile houses in the district continue to increase at 0.7%. So, but that's very, very light upward pressure on housing compared to what we've seen, especially since moving up to the peak in November of 2021, we saw much higher price pressure than that. So house sales fall alongside growing inventories and days to sell. So we had 394 houses sold. That's down 7.7% on the previous year. New Zealand was down 23.3%. So it's really strong decline in house sales across New Zealand. Yeah, our meeting days are still at 50 days. So obviously people are taking a lot longer to sell their properties and inventories have risen strongly. So 22 weeks of stock versus 6 weeks of stock a year ago. So we're seeing the demand side fall away because of rising costs and elevated house prices, and we're seeing the supply side increase. Although when we look at stock, it's actually looking at demand versus supply. So the amount of stock you've got that will provide for supply over several weeks. So as the demand falls away, obviously the stock it shows an increase in the amount of stock we've got relative to demand.
Councillor Shaw.
Have you got any data around first home buyers? Because I think that's always a good indicator of how things are going, because as we know, it's much harder to get a mortgage and things these days. And while you might have almost been there 6 months ago, then the lending conditions changed and
Yeah,
now they're just that little bit more out of reach.
I do have a slide on that shortly. Okay. So unfortunately, we can't get that data at the TA or even regional level. It's only published at the national level from the Reserve Bank. So, but it does show a substantial decline in borrowing across the board, actually, but particular in investors and first home buyers. So yeah, we'll be here shortly. So new dwelling consents are still strong by historical standards, but they have fallen a wee bit. So we're down to 191. So it's down 15 on the year prior, which is a 7.3% decline. New Zealand is actually down in the month of April, down 5,702, which is a 13.3% decline. So we're seeing those pressures in terms of demand start to flow through to our consenting data. Now we're still getting plenty of development, but anecdotally from builders I've spoken to, is some of the building work and renovations are falling away. And you provided some very good information, Councillor Ford, the other day with regard to what our construction sector was saying. I think build off the plans was pretty much disappeared, was one of the comments that were made.
Yep, and I've got another builder responded yesterday, and exactly the same story.
Right.
New inquiry gone. But most of them had a fairly long funnel, if you like, so they've plenty of forward orders. But actually, a few of those have fallen over with cost escalations and supply chain delays, etc. They've actually just crashed the odd deal. So the builders, so we had a local franchise of a large national builder, one of the largest builders in the country, and very strong in our region. Or an upmarket local builder producing a quality product, probably another one that fits that description, but perhaps higher volume, and a large regional construction company who predominantly is commercial and industrial. And they're all saying the same thing. So they're all busy because they've had forward orders for a long time, but it does look a bit concerning looking out once those builds are done. And they're all pretty worried about the price escalations and the supply chain issues. Yeah, so I guess it's pretty much anecdotally proven what we're suspecting and what we're seeing the start of perhaps in the data.
Absolutely, and we're still seeing those consent values actually at record highs. So we're still seeing the high values come through, and of course a lot of that is being driven by work at Ohakea. And there's also in this month there's quite a bit of development for Kawakawa Road as well, about $1.25 million worth of private investment come in at Kawakawa Road. So we're still seeing investment across the market, which is positive, especially that non-resident. I mean, residential is very important too, but seeing the non-residential is promising.
That's hopefully going to be jobs.
Well, there will be jobs, probably too many. That's
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair. Consents. I'm just trying to pick the correlation between consents and certificate of compliances, and the fact that if your data's there, how many buildings have we got? And there's 4 up our road at the moment that are lockable, but nowhere near finished, and the work's completely stopped because there's no gymbal. So are those consents actually being granted in your figures, or are those consents still to be completed?
Yeah, absolutely. These are consents issued.
issued.
So these
Yep.
this is planned investment as opposed to completed investment.
Yep.
But the good, because we don't have that data. But the good news is that Stats New Zealand is actually starting an experimental series where they look at issue of consent and the proportion that actually proceed to code of compliance. And they're also looking at the average number of days, which the latest data they've got is that it takes 517 days from consent issued for code of compliance.
And if I may, just listening on the radio on Saturday mornings to old, what's his name, the builder?
Oh, yeah.
Pete Wolfcamp, and he had a statistic there that he reckons 9 out of 10 houses don't get their code of compliance.
That's an interesting one too.
And that's
because
unbelievable.
if you're going to use code of compliance, you have to accept that you won't capture everything that's completed, because some actually do start living in dwellings without code of compliance, without the ability to get insurance, etc. So there's no perfect measure, but it's interesting to look at those two statistics alongside each other, like issue of consent versus. And I think the data was showing from the initial experimental data from Stats New Zealand that it was about 60%. So I'll get that data for you, but
And it may be something that we
Yeah,
need to
unexpected.
have a further discussion around the council table at, because if we're the last man standing all the time, if there's an issue such as weather tightness and those sorts of things, how does that correlate with our certificate of compliances?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see MB had an emergency meeting over the last couple of days to look at alternative products that they could recommend and give guidance to council, so that was promising.
Well,
And not
right.
the full time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at the duopoly in the grocery department, but it's actually a monopoly as far as Jimble is concerned.
Yeah.
And what are the government doing about it?
And there are alternatives that we can be using.
There was also Yimby, if I may, on the back of that, saying that we need to talk to our architects and say Jib's actually not the only product you can use. So they put Jib on the plans, builder goes, so we have to use Jib.
There are people, as I said the other day, actually importing a lot of plasterboard, and even in Manawatū, I know there's plasterboard coming in from Asia by the container load. And I see in the media the other day, an Auckland builder, I don't know if you saw that article, an Auckland builder said they wouldn't go back to Winston's. They were importing around about 20% cheaper.
Oh my gosh.
And, and for them, that was going to be the supply chain going forward.
So as soon as I guess those issues around the building, not the building process, but the planned works versus the regulatory process of having it changed to another equally as good product, once that's resolved, then we should see some, I hope, some elevation in home frames there.
Winston's building another plant, which is not due to open until May next year, is it?
Meters.
Are they ever going to catch up? The 4-month lockdown, I think, is really what's.
Completed because they can't get there.
Yeah, circular at the moment. So as indicated within my report as well, what we're still building rather large homes here in the district relative to other places. So the average over the year was 215 square metres versus 151 for New Zealand. We know New Zealand, because it's higher density in a lot of the cities, is going to be lower than us. But even across the region, it's around 175. So we're still building larger homes.
I'd say watch this space. I think it'll come down.
Yeah, I'm going to be watching that. It's an interesting statistic. So this is the slide I talked about, and this information was also within the report around mortgage lending across borrower types in April. So this is April data versus April data 22 versus April data 21. The reason I use the monthly data is because it shows that stark contrast rather than using the annual data that takes up some of the period when there was high lending. So this is more of an indicator of what's going on. So investor lending fell away by 41.3%. I wouldn't be surprised if that continued to fall away like that, especially since interest costs are rising and these business people can't claim on those interest costs like other businesses. So first home buyer lending fell 33.5%, really strong. Other owner occupier lending also fell heavily at 31%. So lending for other business purposes fell 6.6%. These businesses actually buying residential property for business purposes. So we've seen a real turn, real change in the capital flows into the residential markets.
So is that more on mum and dad?
I couldn't tell you.
That's frightening. as
Quite
well.
possibly, yeah, that would be a component, absolutely.
Out of interest, when I started in the property business in 1977, the average floor area of new homes was 93 square metres. So,
Certainly change. And when you get expensive pieces of land, developers do want to build upmarket homes on them to maximise their profit margins, because that's where you earn your profits. So profit maximising property developers aren't going to build affordable homes on expensive pieces of land. It's just not good business. So looking at the rental prices, of course, this is very concerning. I'm still seeing double digit, especially in that lower quartile, costs up 29%. Now, this is a volatile series, so it does jump around a bit, but ours is significantly higher than the national level and Palmerston North as well. So it's definitely an area to keep a close eye on. This is the formal rental market again, so it is only those homes that have a bond lodged against them and that are rented to the market. So we do have an informal market here, of course, but we don't get a clear understanding of that, or not even probably a very clear understanding of it at census time. So those increased informal rental prices are concerning, in particular for our lower income families, especially when we need labour to move into the district to support our economy, etc. And also, you know, it creates a lot of hardship for these families. So it's an area, again, I will be keeping a close eye on. Unfortunately, we've seen a decline in informal rental stock over the year as well, down 9 from the previous year. Palmerston North is seeing similar declines in rental stock. And as we know, we're very much a shared market for rental properties. This is exactly the opposite direction that than what we actually need for our communities.
Yeah.
Especially at 2%. Population growth average over the last 3 years.
So government policy, probably unintended consequences. It's a great way to shoot themselves in the foot, really.
Yeah, the interest in
the people they're trying to help.
Yeah, I think the intentions were good, but unfortunately, the policy has created human behaviour, like policy does, which has actually decreased the supply of stock to the market. And as those interest prices rise, it's only going to create more of a disincentive. On the other side of the equation, however, with capital gains no longer a reason to keep hold of property, I guess you could say, then we may see landlords offer their property to the market to achieve yield in the meantime. So that's another thing will be interesting to see in the data if those rental stocks do actually go up and if that has an impact on those prices, weekly price increases. Yeah, interesting times, that's for sure. So public housing need reflects increasing hardship. So the number of families on the public housing register increased by 30 over the year. So we're still seeing quite strong increases. It's up 28.6% on the previous year. All of those families are considered in dire and immediate need of housing. 82.3% of those families are in need of 1 and 2 bedroom homes, and this is one of the issues that we see with rental with our stock across here and other similar parts of New Zealand. We tend toward larger homes and not toward the smaller homes that are in demand by the more vulnerable members of our community. Again, that's a place where the private sector is probably not going to solve the problem. It's a place for public investment, in my view, to solve that problem, to achieve those public good benefits of housing. You know, people living in good, healthy housing has very strong positive outcomes for those families over time. So it's, in my view, a place for government. So New Zealand Public Housing Register increased by 13.4% as well. So well over 36,000 now, almost 36,900. And also the Manawatū Whanganui Regional Housing Register increased by 14.2% to 1,758. families. So if we look at our graph there, of course, back in May 2016, we had 2 families on our public housing register. And to be on the public housing register, you either are not able to afford or access or both property. So some of that is around affordability and some of it is around lack of supply and or both. So, yeah.
It's particularly concerning to hear those high figures over winter where are those families living in the meantime? You've got people that are living in at the holiday park, or they're got a camper van at someone's place, or maybe they're living in family member's garage or something, and people shouldn't, this is New Zealand, not a third world country. We need to be performing better than that.
Yeah. Can agree more.
On a slightly positive note, there are a few not-for-profit organisations locally looking to do some community housing, and I think that we've got some decisions ahead of us, particularly about development contributions and so on. But I just highlighted that this is where this type of information, Stacey, is just so valuable for us when we're making decisions on other things such as development contributions and possible discounts for community housing, etc., etc. I just think we should, keep this sort of information in mind when we're making those decisions, which is probably not in the too distant future.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's very important, isn't it, to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, really, to be able to have the full range of information. Yeah. That's why I try not to shy away from the not so nice stuff. So in the meantime, however, this is positive. Consumption data does reflect the continued confidence to spend in the district. So retail expenditure was up 8.2% versus the year ended April 2021. We also had very strong investment in new cars and commercial vehicles, which was up very, very strongly over the year and higher than the national average. We actually had record commercial vehicles registered over the year, up 44.1% versus 15.6% for Manawatū, Wanganui, and 35.3% for New Zealand. So New Zealand increase in investment there was strong as well, and that's coming off a very low base in 2021, where we didn't actually have access to a lot of vehicles at that time that were in demand. So tourism spending was also up strongly, up 12%. I haven't put this on there, I just thought I'd talk to the consumption data. I think I've already got 26 slides or something. But versus 2.7% decline across New Zealand for tourism spending and a 3.2% increase in Palmerston North. So we're actually doing very well with visitors coming into the district and spending here.
Councillor Short.
I'm just interested in that retail expenditure because you're saying there's been an increase, but it's not what we're hearing on the street. There are, I don't know what others are hearing, there's a lot of Main Street retailers out there just hanging in by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of pressure on employees. You have a staff leave, you don't replace them, so who works for them? Oh, well, I do, so I'm now working 6 days a week and don't get any holidays and all that kind of stuff, and it just compounds. So I think we need to be aware of just how tough it is out there at the moment, and especially because people just aren't going out,
That's really good.
COVID and while there's COVID in the community, people are just going where they have to go, and they're not walking up the street and popping into every shop and having a look, sort of thing.
Is that consumer spending online as well?
No.
In the store?
Yeah, good question. Good question.
Yeah, there has been very much a change in the way they measure retail expenditure too. MarketView, who we use, they used to use the BNZ data, but now that's been removed. So it has impacted a little bit on the series. So I think the best value of this series is to look at us relative to other places and see if we're holding up better in that sense. One thing that was interesting was the arts, recreation and visitor transport figures increasing there. But of course, fuel and automotive was driving a lot of that price increase as well, as it was across the rest of the country. So increasing prices are actually contributing to that. So it's really important with data. It's always looking backwards, and it's always really important to understand what's happening in the community as well, in the experience of people, to actually get some context around that. So it's very helpful information, a little bit concerning information, but yeah, there's certainly pressures out there, and those pressures are growing.
There's an interesting post last night on the diesel cost. And even though we've got a 25% decrease in the road user charges, the increase in the diesel cost has actually now outstripped that. And vehicle expenses are even higher now than they were back in March.
They are, and I've got a slide on that too a bit later, because I was quite interested to look at the very strong increase in diesel relative to 91 in premium, which far outstrips that, but also the cost of importing diesel has also gone through the roof as well. So that's just a reflection of that. It's actually more expensive. And Hamish gave me some information on why that is the case, which we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah, you've stolen the fun of the comparison between petrol and diesel. How do you explain that?
Yeah, well, I do have a slide on that, so that's coming up.
Diesel.
It is those.
It is supply. Point we expect.
Yeah, It's supply versus demand. There's a lot of demand for diesel, and the processing capacity has shrunk. So basically it's a lot more expensive now to process diesel than what it is the other fuel types, which is what is driving up the global price of diesel. It's not just here, it's across the globe.
It's actually a logical explanation, isn't there? And that is that the use of fossil fuels is being phased out before there's an alternative to actually replace it to maintain productivity.
You see what's happening in the Australian East Coast at the moment with the energy crisis there and potential for blackouts. And coal prices have increased 206% over the last 12 months. But the investment hasn't been made in renewables to enable that transition to take place. And when coal is at those prices and the supply is very short, then you cannot generate enough electricity. So
interesting to note that our top 25 trading partners have 2024 coal-fired power plants between them.
Yeah, and Australia is one of the largest producers of uranium and coal. And they can't generate enough electricity. It happened in China in 2020 where they had rolling blackouts across China because they are really committed to transitioning to renewables, but they put the cart before the horse, so to speak. They hadn't made the investment at the level they needed to enable that to happen, so they actually had blackouts, and now they've gone back to relying partially on coal as well as renewables. So it needs to be very carefully planned, that transition, because otherwise it causes these types of issues. I think the government in New South Wales also did put a cap on the price of energy to consumers, and of course when it's costing the energy generators more to produce than what they can actually get paid for it, then that changes the incentives as well. Price caps can be quite dangerous in that way.
Interestingly, I saw an article written by Graham Peters, I think he's the chief executive of the electricity supply, whatever, in saying that they've been actually surprised by the increase in power usage in New Zealand over an historical period. And it's actually taken them by surprise a little bit. So we've got increasing demand for electricity. We know we've already had blackouts in the Waikato. But the interesting thing about China, 1,110 coal-fired power plants and only 54 nuclear, and they've got 15 nuclear on the build, and they were only 24.35% on renewable energy. So when you look at that in the United States, it's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Energy and food, they're the two major concerns for the globe currently.
And water, apparently.
All right, headwinds.
Okay, headwinds. So rising commercial mortgage costs, as we know, those inflationary pressures, 6.9%. The Reserve Bank expects them to peak in this quarter at 7 or just over. Negative wealth effect from softening house prices, that does put downward pressure on spending. People feel less wealthy and they spend less money. Critically tight labour markets, as we've discussed, and too tight migration policy settings. And we'll have a little bit of a chat about global economic volatility. It's been quite an interesting week. Again, those inflationary pressures globally really having an impact on markets and expectations. Okay, so the impact of rising mortgage costs on families. So we've seen floating mortgage rates. This is in the end of, this is May 2022. So they've actually increased since here, but this is the latest data available to us. So as we can see, quite a sharp upturn in the commercial interest rates across New Zealand, across all terms and floating rates. This one here is one I presented to the Joint Strategic, which I found very interesting. So this is the impact on weekly mortgage costs from a doubling in interest rates from 3 to 6%. So 6% is beneath forecast now for what we're looking at over the next year or so. So $300,123 a week more for those families, $500,205 a week more, and as it goes up to $800,000, which is $329 per week. Think about a weekly budget, that is really substantial chunk out of people's income.
That's only the mortgage.
That's only the mortgage. It's not counting all the increased costs aside from that, food costs, etc., which are,
and really scary too. And your land and house packages up on Farrison Street, etc., at that top end at 1.135 mil.
Yeah.
you know, they're even higher than that 329. It's just unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and the 329 is just the increase.
Yeah. Yes.
So global and domestic pressures driven inflation to multi-decade highs. As we know, we're sitting at 6.9%, expected to peak over 7%. US inflation came in a couple of days ago at 8.6%, UK inflation at 9%. The inflation figures for the US sent the global markets into a complete tailspin, and the Fed Reserve came out this morning with a 75 basis point increase in the cash rate, which is the highest since 1992. So they've signalled that they're going to attack inflation with urgency. And now, there's fears of recession in the US, which may or may not happen, or we will see a slowdown, but their fundamentals are very much the same as ours in the sense that they don't have enough labour. They've got really strong labour cost increases and cost increases across the board from war in Ukraine and other domestic factors as well. So, and food prices, of course, with the war in Ukraine and constraints on getting food commodities out of that area and sanctions. So yeah, a lot of pressures there. The 75 basis points was probably priced into the market, so we're not seeing a lot of activity yet on markets, although many of them are yet to open. So yeah, that's really having an impact. As we know in New Zealand, strong price pressure in housing and household utilities, transport up 14%. Food prices, which was released yesterday, was up 6.8%, and vegetables leading that at 10%, but even meat was also up 7%, and dairy was contributed strongly to that increase as well. So that's what we're experiencing here in New Zealand. Farm input costs being predominantly driven by an increase in fuel prices and fertiliser costs and some feed costs for farms that do use grain feed. Producer price index up 8.8% and inputs up 9.8%. So inputs, as we know, is the products that they use in the production process. So the cost, the price that they pay for the inputs for production, and outputs is the price that they receive for their outputs. So up really strongly across the board. Tradables inflation, which is the goods we import from overseas, inflation at 8.5% for those goods, petrol being a large proportion of that, but those other factors as well, like fertiliser, etc., contributing, and non-tradables at 6%. Unfortunately, monetary policy is a necessary tool, but I think I heard a term this morning, it's like hitting a hazelnut with a sledgehammer. It's a very broad based approach to it. It's not specific. So during the early stages of the pandemic, we saw monetary policy loosening. Of course, that had the impact of helping to drive up asset prices, which had impacts on parts of our community. We're going to see the same thing as interest rates rise. It's going to have disproportionate impacts on different parts of our communities, in particular those that are vulnerable or heavily indebted businesses and households. This all sounds very negative, doesn't it? It's not all negative. So I really like this graph, and I'm interested in this since university, about the actual contributors to GDP, and private consumption contributes 60% to our GDP overall. So it's an incredibly important part of our economy. I think we've always got to keep in mind it's not just households, it's private businesses as well that is part of the statistic, but the importance of households to economic activity across New Zealand. So of course 60.9% when we anticipate a decline in spending from households and businesses due to these inflationary pressures and increased costs, then we know that it's going to have an impact on economic activity going forward. So this is what we're expecting. We're expecting consumption to decline, and we're expecting GDP, not necessarily recession, but to really soften. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses going forward. So global economic activity. So I just talked about the US and UK inflation. Anything that happens in the US and China affects us. They make up 42% of global economic activity, and we have large open economies that are having these kinds of pressures that impacts everybody across the world. So I've already talked about the Fed hike this morning. Okay, so I looked at the New Zealand data for petrol and diesel prices. So it's got the Dubai crude, which is where we get the majority of our petrol from. So that's hit at 181 New Zealand dollars per barrel. That's up 85.2% year on year. Diesel up 19.1%. So that's the at price. That's the price at the pump, and that's a discounted. So that takes into consideration the -10 cents or 6 cents. So that's the average. And this was a week ago, I might add as well. So it's up 90.1%. But I will note that the imported cost of diesel is actually up 156%. So the cost of importing it into the country have risen massively, and those costs are being passed on to us. Regular petrol up 37.1% year on year at the pump, but the cost of importing regular petrol is up 126% over the year. Premium up 33.6% for us at the pump, but the cost of importing that is up 124.3%. So I don't think we're being fleeced by the industry at the moment. They're suffering with much higher costs of importation, but a lot of those costs are being passed on to us, which is what we're seeing at the tank, I should say.
Councillor Hill.
Just as a matter of interest, do we have any data on our oil exports?
Yes, I don't have it before me, but yes, we will have data on that. I will have a look. It's not a major export for us, but.
Is there any, and I guess it's a bad question, is there any evidence to suggest that closing Marsden Point is contributing to that?
I've read some interesting analysis around that. One which implied, or actually stated, that it would actually put downward pressure on the cost of petrol here, because the cost there is higher than what it is internationally. But now that the market has changed considerably, having that capability domestically, I would say would be very important.
Does the same apply to diesel? Don't know.
I don't know. I'll look into it. I'll have a look. Yeah, it is an interesting question. I think globalization is when it's working well, globalization benefits everybody. But when you come across, when you come up against the pressures or the issues that we've had over the last couple of years, you really see where the vulnerabilities are around globalization.
Sure.
Stacey, mine was on the previous slide, and the fact that the export dollars that you'd give us, that's all based on that dollar. I have real concerns about our throughput at the ports, and the commodity price discussion that was held earlier around meatworks and those sorts of things. We can't get any containers, refrigerated containers, etc. And there'd be a fair bit of product in New Zealand at the moment that's still sitting on the AFCO sites or land packers in the containers. And 3 deaths at the Auckland ports over the last 12 months, and how slow that has now made the ports through WorkSafe and those sorts of things. It'd be interesting to know, just on a volume basis, how constrained that is, because if our commodity prices are up, but our throughput's so much behind last year, the opportunity costs there are huge.
Yeah, one of the things that is driving those really high commodity price growth for our food products is the fact that global supply, globally, producers are having these issues, constraints around supply and getting their product out there to the market. So that's actually driving a lot of the increase in those prices, and that's set to continue. So what we're experiencing here is it is constraining the amount of output that we can produce, and it's happening all over the world.
And again, an interesting one on this morning's news, that there's a company wanting to start up internal freight again to 14 different ports. Doesn't really affect us here, but I mean, some councils will be looking to upgrade ports, etc., which will be a huge cost to ratepayers, etc.
Agreed.
Stacey, can I just ask approximately how long have we got to go on the presentation?
Oh, probably only 5 minutes, if that. Depends on the discussion.
Yeah, which is really positive, I think.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious we've got some guests.
Sure.
Whether we break or we perhaps carry on, I think, from what you're saying.
Yeah, there's not too much.
Councillor Hadfield's got a very quick question.
Yeah, very quick question. Actually, just follow on. It wasn't a question, a comment. Follow on from Councillor Marsh. Is that I note the other day that Auckland ports of Auckland have abandoned their robotic system of trying to optimise productivity, and tossed it out at a cost of however many 50-60 million or something that they've written off, and going back to a manual system. So productivity and efficiency at the port's also important.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are major issues around that, that's for sure. So economic outlook. So we've got some positives here as well as some challenges, obviously, but our economy will benefit from those high commodity prices and elevated employment. And one thing that's different in this, don't want to use the word slowdown, but with these challenges, one thing that's very different about this cycle relative to most others is that we have extremely high employment. So when people are employed, they're earning money. Yes, they've got lower disposable incomes because of increasing costs, but they're still earning money, and that will help to support economic activity going forward. We do expect unemployment to rise over time, with the Reserve Bank actually forecasting a 4.8% unemployment rate by June 2025. So it's something we'll be keeping an eye on too, but keeping in mind that we always have a much lower unemployment rate here than the national average. So we still expect those elevated employment levels. We also have the public investment and employment growing within the area, which is a real strong point for the regional economy, Palmerston North and us, because those incomes are protected or less sensitive to changes in demand and economic conditions globally. So that's a real positive for us. So we're still going to see those international and domestic factors constraining global supply chains. So that is set to continue, and this will put upward pressure on the cost of goods and services to consumers. So we expect inflation to carry on, hopefully getting under control by late 2023, early 24, coming back into range. We will see those interest rates continue to rise, and the more inflationary pressure we see, the more at pace and higher OCR we're likely to see. Disposable incomes will be affected and place downward pressure on spending across the economy relative to what the costs were increasing at their rate. So despite the challenges, there are considerable strengths in our local economy. So those export conditions are set to remain favourable, and I'm always keeping a very close eye on that because conditions can change very, very quickly, but right now the outlook is very positive. Employment, as I've just said, expected to remain very high, public sector employment and earnings as well. Recovering events sector activity in Palmerston North City and it will come here as well, will support economic activity as well and boost some of that spending that we'll lose from other parts of the economy, such as households. And we still do have that pipeline of work coming through with the planned investment of over 8 billion to 2035, which will give businesses some confidence that they have work over time and have the confidence to employ and invest in that sense. So that's me. I think I covered everything.
So there have been some questions, but are there any more questions?
Good luck on Saturday.
Saturday?
You got your son's wedding?
Oh, next Saturday, my son's getting married. Yes, very exciting. No COVID. Okay, before then. Yes, thank you, Phil.
Yeah, we all wish you and your son and everybody a very happy day.
Yeah, thank you.
Stacey, thank you very much. Absolutely
fantastic.
Totally valuable information for us, and I think in fact, you see our members engage with you. It is really important. So thank you. That's okay.
You're welcome. I always enjoy the conversation. It's
probably just a change in terminology that Stacey needs to use, and the fact that she said that she was quite happy to give us the negative as well as the positive. I think it's the positive and the scary. Especially the
I'll change the terminology next time. Thank you.
We have our guests from Manawatū. Please come and join us up at the table. A very big welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing about your community plan. But I'm going to ask Councillor Casey to welcome you and to introduce you. Oh, we do need a resolution, so let's thank you. Hello. Page 30. Someone to move that the council receive the economic report. Councillor Hadfield, seconded by Councillor Casey. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Everybody's raising their hand. Councillor Belsky, well done. To the contrary, carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Casey.
Yeah, block outstanding.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to welcome the Manawatū Community Committee to the table. Alan in the middle is the chairperson, and Secretary and Trevor is one of the workers. It's been a great pleasure to be a part of this group developing the community plan, and that was one of the objectives at the start of the training was to let's get Bainesi and Rangiautū's community plan going. We're here, so it's with my great pleasure that I welcome you to the table through the chair to just talk us through the community plan. And you'll notice too that councillors are actually in receipt of the community plan as well.
So, Alan, would you like to talk your way through it? And we're very interested.
Morena, can't even be here today. Yes, I won't be talking to you. I've got my left-hand man who's going to present, and he's got a much louder voice than I have. So Trevor Donaldson will do our presentation for us.
Oh, well, thanks for letting us present our community plan to you. And yeah, it's good to see you all got a copy of it. And I'll just wander through it with the help of Alan and Anne. But yes, a note on it, there was nothing about rate increases or anything, so we're just only about the upper limit. Right, we got a few photos. They're a bit different at the moment because there's a bit more water around the place out there. Some of it, but we'll just start quickly what we're finding with that. Yeah, we did a bit of history because we didn't believe you had to have a bit of history, sorry, to move forward. You have to look back a little bit. So we put a bit of history in there. The summary of the plans, the shared community visions, and yep, 3 stages, a list of actions that we wish to take. And the old bike, if you're ever going down towards Hamatangi, it's on the right-hand side past Callums Road. That's where that photo comes from. Our map, now this is more important because I had a look at it and the way it's set up there, Manawatū district looks quite good. And it looks like it's standing up. We're at the bottom. We are the feet. The one that holds you and makes you run better. The heart's in the middle where you are feeling where we are now, but you've got to remember we are the feet that keep you standing well. All our roads, we've extended it. It goes out to up to Kairinga Bunnythorpe, heading towards Longburn and shoots through to Taikaria Road. So it's quite a big area we've kind of taken on. We're trying to get a few more members from around these areas just to help us make these few decisions. If you turn over to the history, like we're saying, you see the map with all the circles. Rangi is a bit of a small circle, but the old steam trains, they had to stop every so many miles. So that's where a lot of these names come from, and a lot of these communities set up. They had to stop, put water on. They had to be watered as well, and they're basically there to make sure there was water in the steam trains, and they also used them for loading and unloading. I must be getting old because I can remember that old steam train coming past and tooting at me when I was a little kid, trying to see how they can frighten us. The photos, there's a couple of the old ones, Kariri getting pulled down, and a couple at the bottom there of, not too sure if that's the 53 flood and that, them trying to pull a hay out of, to rescue a bit of hay. That's when the stop banks broke down our way, and there was one of the highest floods ever happened. Otherwise, the other one's just the old Bainesi school. We had a planning day in November last year, and this is where our plans all come from. And as you can see, a couple of photos there, them lecturing us and telling us what we had to put on. But everyone put their little notes on the board and participated, which was quite pleasing to see. It's pretty hard to get a community like ours to start participating and saying what they actually want and where they want to see us going. So just that, I expect it could be a clover. And some of the things that they like the history, which of course Rangiautū Bainesi has a real old history, and that's all part of their history we just gone past. Friendliness, there's all multi-generations out there. Yeah, no, so we've started wanting good infrastructure now, and as we're close to the beach, we're kind of like a bypass. People fly through us at 100 miles, 100 k's an hour, and wouldn't even know what we've got there. And of course, what's right at this moment, good flood protection. And it definitely shows what we do need, a bit more of management or flood protection, how we are, because it can be quite a mess and strain on our community if it doesn't all work. So there's a photo of us in the hall, trying to put all that together. Now, the vision, yep, it's just a shared statement of our Bain SEN radio that has been developed through the community workshops. The next bit is direction. We're a multi-generation community, and we are, because you know, there's 2-3 generations down there in a lot of the farms, but we're all moving on too. There's people just going, coming, and it's amazing who's still there from way back. Our natural and social environment reflects our pride in our people, and this is the hall, and where we can gather together is very important to our community. And all these nice photos they take. That's the sandhill, no water up there. And this is what come out of this meeting. Well, part of it, yeah. For our community, we want to organise our regular community events. And we have them. We do have regular ones, and like we've got one coming up now is 2 farewells for members of our community that are leaving. And yeah, and that's coming up like this weekend. So we organise a farewell, which is sometimes now unusual in communities. We don't see so much. Yeah, investigate ways of increasing the community participation. And this helps by having these like a farewell and encouraging everyone to come along. We then can say at these meetings, well, are you going to give us a hand in our community, and where would you like us to go? So one of our first ones here is encouraging residents to participate in the neighbourhood watch. That's ongoing. We want that to be happening now. And it showed up just the other night. I got a phone call, I think, from this council to say that they're expecting a breach in one of the stop banks down there. And I understand they rang our secretary to try and get a list of names, and we found out they aren't quite done correctly at the moment. So we have to try and move on that. So that is an important part that we want to do as our committee, and do that fairly quickly and get that up and running. Investigate ways to welcome the new residents, which is what we're doing. The environment, advocate for increased police. So it was amazing how many people actually asked for that. So I can see that's at the top there. We're in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if you all know, but yeah, we could get Foxton police, and they don't have police there all the time. So Laverne, we can get them from Fielding when you do have them, but sometimes you don't. Palmerston North. So if you ring up, you don't know who you're going to get and if they're going to turn up. And I know I had an incident there once, and I think one from Foxton ended up coming there a couple of days later. And he said, "Oh no, I'm just come up here to take a box." So it's a bit disappointing when you sit kind of so close to everything, but yeah, you don't get the results. Identify projects that would help to protect the environment. And that's like the stop banks and a lot of other stuff that we aren't involved with, but we could encourage them to happen. Right, this next one is is an important one, which we're doing right now: develop and beautify plans, which include a public rest area. Where it's amazing how many people stop and rest out there, you know, and they just find somewhere to stop and talk on the phone. I've watched them because I'm dead opposite them. Two cars come from one direction to the other and they swap people over. I don't know if they're having a bit of a meeting or whatever it is. And so why not have an area? You know, we've got to do something. And the other thing is, you see the photo down there, us doing our planting. This area, when the trains went in 1960 and they redid it, it was all left and nothing really has been done since the 60s. So that's unless we've got a plan and we're going to go somewhere, it's going to stay for another 40, 50 years. So that's why we want this beautification. So that's on top of our list. Yeah, it can't just keep sitting there for 50, 60 years and nothing happened. And then we establish a community working group, identify places of interest. And we want to erect that on the board so people that's resting in our rest area can see what actually has happened in our area and what they're looking at if they want to. And the other is just to stop. I think if we do that and do a few other things, we will get people stopping and having a look in our community. And of course, to do that, we have to organise working bees. The infrastructure and amenities over. And of course, we've got a photo of our good hall and our memorial. And the first one is we're looking at right now as partner with other stakeholders to develop the cycle and walkways. Even at our meeting last night, we had someone along that belongs to the trust, the working trust of the cycle and walkway, and to explain and where they're going, where they can raise money from. And yeah, we're only there to encourage them, help them, and trying to get something going from. I know it's Palmerston to Foxton or the beach, but we want to definitely see it from Rangiora to Shrewd Bay Nessie, and we believe we can actually get that going. So as we can see something, let's target it and let's try and do it. Advocate to council to improve our roading. This is fairly important too, and I think we're going to keep trying to do this because we've got a couple of little roads with the speed of the traffic going through there and a lot more traffic or increase in traffic. We've got roads that go off like Pikes Road, Main Drain, but we've got nowhere to really pull off. So you're sitting in the middle of a road and here's a 50-ton truck coming along behind you and they can see it, they slow down, but no one sees them behind and someone starts passing them. I've actually turned down there and had a truck behind me slowing down, and as I turn, a car's passing the truck. And so that's where we would like to see some of our roads improve, is pull-off areas or places in the middle, turning areas. And just for safety for the community. We've got to do more investigation into our centralising of recycling bins. We are a long way from anywhere to get recycles, and maybe we can do one in our community somewhere rather than everyone's got bins or anything. It's just something to look at because people are talking about it. Improve phone coverage, which is self-explanatory, really. Complete and upgrade Memorial Hall. We're doing so well at the moment. I'm patting myself on the back, especially Alan, organising it and getting people there. If you saw the hall only 5 years ago and then see it today, you wouldn't really recognise it. So we're really on the way there, and it's helped to this council that actually, and our community, and setting up our committee, has actually got that as far as it has. So there's a big thanks to this council. Otherwise, we've just got another good photo. And if Alan or Anne wants to present something else on something I've just missed out on. But,
I've just got a couple of things I'd like to point out of it, and not really a lot to do with the community plan. It's just explaining pictures. If you have a look at page 8, you'll see a picture of the inside of the hall. So the test question goes to this. And the test question is, why is the floor laid on the diagonal? If I've told you the answer, you can't answer. Nobody know?
Anyone have a crack? maybe some of our officers might want to go.
Well,
Put us out of our misery.
yeah, during the 50s, the thing that became very popular in country halls was playing indoor bowls. And a lot of halls relayed their floors. And you can see this is very narrow strips of remu laid on the diagonal, and that was to stop the bowls catching the groove and being pulled.
Going down straight.
You got it, didn't you?
It's trouble going straight.
And then the other one, if you go over to page 13, that's you see that when we organise a working bee and tell people to bring a shovel, a Kenworth truck and a digger and a wheelbarrow. And I think that's a bit what happens in country areas. People turn up in force and they bring everything they've got. And so we were there to plant, I forget how many, 100 plants. So everybody came with a shovel and a high-vis jacket. But we also got a digger and a Kenworth truck. So I thought that was worth mentioning. So there we are. And I think if there's any questions, we're really pleased to answer them.
Look, it's just great to see your the initiative, your plan, your enthusiasm. I'm a great believer in, particularly in provincial New Zealand, that if it's to be, it's up to me. People in Wellington are not going to do it for you or us or anyone else. And Trevor made comment of, probably been like that since the railway went in 60 years ago or 1960s, whatever. And the risk of it sitting there doing nothing for another 40 or 50 years. And I think you've taken the bull by the horns, if you like, and said, right, we are actually going to do something about it. And it's great to see. Councillor Marshall and Councillor Quarry.
Yeah, congratulations, team. I think it's fantastic that you've got that together. Just one comment, is this in draft form or has it gone out to the community now?
It's ready to go.
Ready to go. While we were discussing, I just flicked back through all the other community plans on the web, and I'm just looking at the cover and just thinking, why have we done it in MDC colour? Make it your own is what I'm getting to, and the fact of why can't we do the cover in Whainesi Rangiautū photos? It could be anything, but if you go onto the MDC website, got all the community plans up there that you can just click on and see everybody else's in the way that they've done theirs. And I'm just thinking, instead of making an MDC document, make it a Rangiautū Whainesi document, and you might just get a bit more of a buy-in from the community. But other than that, congratulations on it. Right.
Thank you for coming, but I think we might be a little late, I think.
Yeah, well, that's fine, but it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to congratulate you on the work you've done for the community. We get around to see quite a few community halls, and yours is one that we hold in high esteem. You've done a terrific amount of work. You've upgraded it dramatically, and yeah, it's a real credit to you. So well done on that. Pleasing to see the plan. You've got plans for a viewing platform and so forth, and until you get involved in the community, you don't realise what it has to offer. And I think once you get your viewing platform there, it'll certainly be an attraction for people to view the district from a high point. So congratulations, well done, and we look forward to moving forward.
Thank you. I might just explain what Councillor Quarry was just talking about, is that there's an area there that there's a natural place for people to stop, but it's also the dumping area for remetalling roads. We've sort of got a bit of a conflict of how we use that area. But there's a large pile of dirt that was left over there. It's been there, you remember what it was there? Yeah, 30 years at least 30, maybe 40, I would think it has. So that the council have said, yes, we can use that. Now, if we put a viewing platform on top of that, and the base of the platform or the standing area of the platform is about head height, 6 foot if you're a tall person, if you're my height, it's not. It's you can actually see over all the surrounding stop banks. So what's clever about that? Well, you can actually see the whole of the flood protection scheme laid out in front of you. You can look out to the hills and you can see right over to the back of Shannon where the first government-built hydro station is. You can look further along, you can see Arawaru, which is the lookout point where you see Rangatani from this side of the ranges could communicate with Rangatani on the other side by going up to the top of the mountain and lighting a fire up there. So, and right down to the windmills, there's just so many things. You turn around and face the other way and you can see real paper and things like that. So there's a huge lot of things. And even in the local community, just down the road, you've got the old World War I military training camp that was established there. There's lots of things that you can give little signals to where things are. Doesn't mean to say people are going to rush off to those places, but at least they know where they are. And you know, a lot of people passing by and stopping wouldn't realise that up in the hills just at the back, you've got that hydro station that is old and forward thinking is what it was. So yeah, that's our little concentration is around that area. Rangiaotu is around where the post office is, from the marae up through past the post office, around the hall, that area there. There's a large area which is a natural lay-by for trucking, camper vans, all sorts of people stop. And people do stop. I actually pull in the time when people stop there and I think, what on earth are they doing? Stop there. So I go and have a chat with them. and often they're just families. So one part of the family is at Foxton, another one in Palmerston. So they ring one another and say, we'll meet at Rangiaotu. And they sit and have a picnic on the side of the road.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. And your commentary is really useful for us all. But and we can sort of act as disciples and spread the message as we get around our district as well, because it's the information that you're telling us about is really important. And so thanks for that, Councillor Short.
Thank you. It's really good to see this come together. And I was lucky enough to attend one or two of the workshops. And I think the thing that you've highlighted most is it's about the people. I mean, I live in a similar rural community. Our roads perhaps not quite as busy as you know. There's a hall and 3 kilometres away there's a church, and anyone that drives through would think nothing to see here, but actually we have a really strong, vibrant community, as you do down there. And I think, and you've got some, as you say, looking back at your history, and not only your European history, you've got some really significant pre-European history down there, Pukitocha and things. It's great to see it all being celebrated. And I think if you get the people out and together and getting to know each other, then magical things might just happen.
All right, well, thank you very much. And I think now's a good time for us to have a morning tea break, and we'd love you to join us. Come and have a cup of tea with us, please.
Sounds really good. Thank you.
You're right. That one? Okay. And thanks for informing us all of your community plan. It's really exciting. We wish you all the best with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, play We will reconvene and we move to the adoption of our waste management and minimisation plan. We'll invite Hamish and Brittany. Yep, you're unlikely to be required. Usual, thank you. Welcome, Brittany.
No worries. Welcome. Thank you. Whatever the intro is supposed to be. Today, we're asking you to adopt the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2022 to 2028. Just a reminder of the consultation timeline that we followed. We held public consultation from the 8th of April to the 9th of May. We had hearings on the 19th of May and deliberations on the 2nd of June. So just bring you to one minor amendment since deliberations. So we talked at deliberations about the need to implement the bin clips as soon as possible for high wind areas. So we reassessed and thought, why don't we just bring the whole implementation of fielding forward to the 22-23 financial year. So that's again use of waste levy funding. And although that's unbudgeted expenditure, it is the waste levy fund. And so we'll be able to approve that using the delegations manual for the general manager infrastructure.
So Bert, if I can just, does that require a change in our minutes that we passed this morning as to the motions last week?
Should you adopt the plan, you'll be adopting that change in implementation timing.
Okay, thank you.
So councillors, there's nothing else I wish to raise in regards to the plans. So unless you have any questions, we'd be happy to move to the recommendations.
Right, any questions? Councillor Short?
No, thanks, Brittany. It was just around when it goes to the annual plan, long-term plan process, how we work through the Hinatangi situation, just to making sure there's enough flexibility in there that we're, if we adopt Hinatangi as one of the 4 villages, that we're not going to be binding every household regardless of whether they're a holiday home or a permanent resident. And I don't know how we're going to get around it, but as long as it's the flexibility that we can.
Yeah, so we'll look at the cost implications, and yeah, we can reassess whether there's some movement in the service. But so basically you're adopting the service to be implemented, but there's some give and take in regards to how it's implemented and the service delivery conditions, etc.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Happy to move.
Councillor Marsh?
Recommendation that the council adopt the Waste Management Minimisation Plan 2022 to 2028 as provided in Appendix 1 of this report.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Seconder, any discussion? Got the motion, all those in favour, please raise your hand. Contrary?
Cool. So we'll be getting some comms out, just informing the community of the decision, and also submission response letters.
Really, thank you very much. As you reflect last time, but this has been a big body of work, and I think it's a really positive thing for our district, our community. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you to you guys as well.
Right, we move to 11.4 on page 74, the establishment of a submissions assessment panel. And Kathy and Ellie. Right, Ellie, would you like to join us at the table? Stay there? That's great.
But I'll speak up, hopefully. With the increasing number of consultations that council is seeing, there's been a need to have a look at a more efficient way of getting council input into, firstly, which consultations council wishes to be involved in, and secondly, looking at draft submissions ready for sending through the process. Having them come to council meetings, when we have council meetings fortnightly, in the past when there hasn't been so many consultations with very short turnaround times, but now we're seeing consultations that we just get a couple of weeks from submissions being called to when they need to be lodged, which doesn't fit with bringing them to a council meeting for consideration and adoption. So what's being proposed is an assessment panel that would look through the list of upcoming consultations, which changes very regularly, and decide which ones council would either make a submission on or possibly support a taituara submission, or both, or not make a submission on. But then look at draft submissions that have been prepared and approve them for submission before the deadline closes. As part of what we're proposing is we would bring full transparency, a copy of all submissions that have been lodged through to council for information afterwards. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Open it for questions. Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may,
yep.
I do. It's reinforced to me through Councillor Short the true horror of what's coming to us as far as policies go. And I was slightly, not slightly annoyed, what's the word, just slightly concerned that we've only got 3 councillors and X amount of staff. I'm just wondering if it should be the pool should be slightly bigger to use from, given the volume of work and the complexity of the work as well. And I'm just wondering, maybe it's the minimum of 3 and 3, but also to, if needed, we can expand it further to include other councillors who are available. It's just based on the sheer volume of policy heading our way, tsunami, and our capability to be in that space. So that's just what I'm clarifying through the GM. Yeah. I don't know if there's any comment or not. I was just more. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone like to comment on that? So Kathy.
Just to respond, that Mayor Helen had proposed a small number, I suppose in the aim of being agile, and with Grant representing suburban and Alison representing rural district. So that was the original proposal that Mayor Helen had thought we would do to get things moving forward quickly and getting through the amount of submissions that we're going to have to get through over the next wee while.
If I may add to that, there's the quorum is 2 elected members and 1 executive team member. And also the meetings can be held via email as well, rather than in-person meetings. More agility and flexibility.
Councillor Short.
Thank you. And when we met the other day to discuss the proposal of setting it up, Lisa had kindly already gone through and highlighted some more important ones, and perhaps there might be opportunities for those that have got enough leeway going into them that, you know, perhaps they might be exposed to the whole council, like for instance the National Policy Statement on Indigenous biodiversity, ones like that, the Water Services Entity Bill. We might bring that to the whole of council. I was wondering, Kathy, whether perhaps we could stipulate the list of what's coming to all elected members, and then they can see why there's been a need to set something up, because some of them, like in 1 week, there's just 4 major ones, including the emissions budget, the land transport regulatory system, conservation management. I mean, there's just so many at a time that, you know, there really needs to be a plan on how we're going to respond to these coming in. And of course, you know, when we're talking about things that central government send our way, it's the resources this is taking as well. You know, it's the staff hours and things.
Councillor Corrie was first.
Yeah, it was just a question. I think Alison's answered it in regard to, you know, how do we know what's been submitted, or the topic on what's been submitted, and if all elected members are given the topics before the subcommittee meets, then yeah, that should be fine.
Yeah, well, I think when I look back to some comments that I made on the original water stuff, you know, around you know, it actually took bloody hours of reading around aesthetic values, drinking water standards, environmental QA rules, roof water, rural ag water, spring and bore water. And so to find those documents, download them all and download the summaries, actually took a considerable amount of work and a considerable amount of time to go through to see what, you know, is being faced. So I don't think, I mean, there's different things that I think all of our elected members have more of an interest in, or more of a bit of a focus on, in terms of whichever part of it, but we represent the whole community regardless. And I think there would be no doubt in my mind that that this group would actually be engaging with elected members, and then it would be up to the elected members if they want to research and respond. And I think that's actually, in my view, the efficient way of doing it. And I think succinctly summed up by Ellie is the short timeframes we're getting from this government in terms of actually this is what we're consulting on, and this is when you have to do it by. And we know some of them have only been 2 or 3 days. So it was really just all around, I think, as Kevin said, in terms of looking to streamline and for efficiency, but certainly not excluding elected members from actually having input. And I think, you know, that's you know, from topics that come up as Councillor Short has whipped around, the stuff in here, like the emissions budget. Well, you know, that could be quite contentious, you know, and different elected members may, for instance, have a view on that. But, you know, given the short timeframes we've got to operate, I think what we were, and I think that's the point I made originally, is that council needed to have an efficient way of assuring the community that we're actually, submitting to central government on things that affect their daily lives. I think it's the important thing, and I think this actually does it well.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I note in the fourth of the recommendations that the completed submissions be included in the next scheduled meeting agenda for receipt and noting by the council, and that we are delegating authority to the panel to act on our behalf. But I think it's just some reassurance that the bigger meatier ones that maybe that Alison Short, it's a fear of missing out here, Mr. Chair. That's what I'm trying to spit out. And I guess it's that allowing that delegated authority or that committee to actually report back, hey folks, this is something you need to be aware of and you need to comment on. And I just think it's those components there that it's looking for reassurance and making sure as a governance body that we're actually in the space, we're making the right decisions and we're feeding back at the right time. Sorry for the convoluted and slightly disjointed comment there, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Yeah.
I was sort of the understanding that this group would, I guess, cull the ones that we don't need to submit on. So that's a huge advantage. Handle either through the committee or delegate to staff some of minor importance is probably not the right wording, but yeah. But as with you, Councillor Casey, perhaps like some submission on the order entity bill, etc. To me, that just has to come to council. Absolutely, it shouldn't be a committee, and I just don't know whether the wording here says that. That's the only thing. I think I've certainly received reassurances from Councillors Short and Hadfield, but I'm just not sure that it actually says that. Lisa might be able to help us.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to raise, like, often with a consultation, like even a major one, often the consultation period is a month. And then because reports have to be prepared 2 weeks in advance of the council meeting, that only sometimes gives officers about a week to write the submission. And when you've got to get input from across council, that doesn't give us enough time to write a good submission and time to be included in the council agenda. So that was why we sort of done this. This approach was to give officers more time to put together a good submission and then to have that go past the panel for approval to submit. It's not intended to mean that others can't have input, but maybe it's in a less formal manner than presenting it to a council meeting, just because of those difficulties with those timeframes. But then it would be, bringing the final back to that council meeting so that it is on the public record. But yeah, just trying to sort of work around those difficult timeframes.
So I guess in summary, you're after that you're suggesting that elected members should receive a list of.
They've already got it.
Got it.
Yeah, but on a regular basis.
On
a regular basis, so that elected members put their hand up and say, I'm interested in participating.
Absolutely, and the onus falls back on us, to support the panel, absolutely, and just to get our heads back in the game. And I take my hat off to the crew tackling that tsunami. Yeah.
So they would I assume that that list would be emailed out. It wouldn't come to a council meeting. It would be emailed out to elected members, and recognising that because submissions can appear quite quickly, there will be some that potentially on a regular email distribution, just because.
Thanks, Lynn. Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, I think understand where Councillor Casey is coming from. I think the short time frame is actually the reason for having it short and sweet. And I think if you, Mr. Chair, to not put words in your mouth, but staff will deal with, I think, very ably deal with things that are more involved with the process and those sorts of things. We may, at a meeting quickly, say federated farmers might submit on something, have a submission on something, and we might decide actually that that's a really good position that council would support, and I'd see the group actually doing that sort of thing as well.
Adopt that and then run it.
And just saying that actually, instead of doing whatever, we might just say, yeah, Federated Farmers' position on this is actually the view of our council, you know, and I think without looking for any fishhooks, I think it's been vitally important that we actually do better in fronting up the central government about inane legislation that actually does affect our community and that most sane people can actually see have got, you know, consequences. And I think this is probably an efficient way of doing it. It's my view, but there's nothing in here, I don't believe, that is actually designed in any way to exclude. It's actually designed to encourage elected members when they receive something to actually decide whether they want to hook in and do a bit of quick research. And it's actually going to be more efficient, I believe, as Lisa says, doing this in an email context and a shortened context rather than other than the big meaty ones that we want to discuss in public forum, bringing to a council meeting where the time frame allows, if the consultation period is longer than 3, 4, 5, 7 or 14 days. Yeah. And I think, you know, that just shores up our ability to be able to actually do better in that short time frame space. That's my view.
Okay, I think I've got a level of comfort from the conversation that so long as all elected members are notified of submissions coming up, and if I'm particularly interested in the unicycle submission, well then that I have that opportunity. So the onus is actually on me to do something about it, as opposed to you having to report back to council. Yeah, because I can see that's cumbersome and time consuming. So I'm okay with it, Councillor Short.
And I think having the list is very, very helpful, because often we get notified about them one at a time and not a lot of time to work into it. But if you look on the list, which you've now received from Kathy, she's dead efficient, you might see there's something in September that you're particularly interested in. You can start looking up and doing some research now, because I know that there's been some that we've missed. When we were busy focusing on our waste minimisation plan, there was a national consultation on recycling. I can't remember what it was called. When I looked it up, it closed in 2 days. I thought, oh, we've missed the boat on that one, unless the staff did something. You did? Oh, okay. Right. But, you know, as elected members, I wasn't aware that one was coming up. But seeing it in a list like this gives you plenty of notice what's ahead, and you can decide if there's things that you're interested in.
All right, sounds good. Any further discussion? Councillor Marsh?
Thank you, Chair. 2 points from me. The first one's just around process. With election coming up, etc. I'm just wondering in Appendix 1 whether we actually should be naming the council, or whether we should take just advice and have councillor, one urban, one rural, just to keep that mix there. Because a lot of those actually flow into the next training. So that's just the process one. The second one I'd like to bring up is under 7.1, and not wanting to muddy the waters at all, and probably a comment from Ali. Just had a declaration or a decision made by the Remuneration Authority. To me, this does have a financial implication, because it's now a statutory or subordinate decision-making body within council, should there be some remuneration attached to it.
Right, Ellie, you have it.
I could answer those. This question about having non-specified names, under the Local Electoral Act or Local Government Act, at time of election, this council goes out of office and all committees are disestablished. So we can only have this up until the election. After the election, arrangements would need to be re-established by the new council. So they can't, unless we decided that we would carry over, but then we don't need to change people. So, and the new council could say, no, we don't want to do it that way. Without any remuneration, we have a determination. We cannot change what has been determined by the Remuneration Authority for this training, which is the current positions and remuneration. This is a non-remunerated panel.
So it's certainly something that we need to look at in the new triennium, because again, if it's a decision-making body in my mind, and take my example here with the health and safety from the governance team, I can't make any decisions for council within that, whereas I see that this is a decision-making body therefore it should have some remuneration attached.
All right, so if we included in the mix those of us who may be back after the election for consideration, Councillor Short.
I was just going to say, it's quite similar to a focus group or working group, really. And the other group that we have that sort of fits the same category is in community development, the assessment panel, which is 2 elected members and 2 staff. So this one's a bit bigger, but it's sort of the same terms of reference.
Okay. Anyone would like to move the recommendations?
I feel conflicted, so I'll let someone else do it.
All right, I'm happy to do so. So I move 1, that the council establishes the submissions assessment panel as a subordinate decision-making body of council. The terms of reference are set out in Appendix 1 to the report of the General Manager Corporate, dated 27 May 2022. 2, that the council delegates authority to the submissions assessment panel as a subordinate decision-making body for evaluating the forward programme of regional and national policy consultations and determining which matters the council will either make a submission to, support another body's submission, or decline to make a submission. 3, that the council delegates authority to the submissions assessment panel to consider and approve submissions on regional or national policy consultations for submitting either under the signature of the Mayor or under the signature of the Chief Executive. And 4, that completed submissions be included in the next scheduled council meeting agenda for receipt and noting by the council. Is there a second? Councillor Quarry has seconded that. Any discussion? So we're just handling the recommendations on page 74. I have moved, Councillor Quarry has seconded. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. To the contrary, carried. Thank you, and thank you to Councillors Short and Hadfield and Her Worship for agreeing to go on that, because it is I do see it as an onerous task, but I also agree that it's an important one. So thank you. Right, we finally get to where I thought we were
at the start.
Apologies for that. So we're at page 80.
Would you like me to kick it off?
Thank you, Councillor G. Taylor. That would be fantastic.
So these youth council minutes are from May. I think just probably a really big highlight for us is our submission that was made to the Horizons Public Transport. What's it called? The hearing. And so, look, it was really, really cool. And Corbin, our youngest member, went and spoke to this to the submission, and he did, yeah. And look, he did really well with it, and actually understanding what he was submitting on is a big thing in general in terms of the importance of submitting and understanding how youth perspective is and how to express that. So that was a big one. And we also submitted on the waste management and minimisation plans. So youth council is just really wanting to step in and throw their weight around in terms of decision making, which is really cool to see. We have, following these minutes, we have actually had to postpone the colour run again. The date in these minutes is for June, and it is July, and that is the day after their ball, I think. And so that was not really going to get us the people to help. So that's been postponed. But other than that, next week we have got the careers coach coming to Fielding High School, which is something that we have funded through the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs funding. So that's really exciting. Yeah, that's about where we're at.
Sounds very positive. Councillor Short.
I was actually sitting in the gallery at Horizons when Corbin spoke, and Shane supported him, and I thought he did really, really well, because that, you know, first of all, it's sort of quite a formal setting going in there and everything, and you got people watching online and all sorts, but he was really cool, calm and collected, and he knew the background to it, and they asked him what could have been difficult questions, but I think he answered them really well. And if there was ones he didn't know the answers to, he just said, well, we haven't discussed that as a committee. So yeah, he did really well.
Great. How old's Corbin?
13. He was high student.
Adam Deacons.
Yeah, 10 years ago, his father and I and Corbin, we were strutting around in high-heeled shoes, the three of us. We were, his father and I were models at the op shop fundraiser. Dragon models.
I was wondering where that was going to.
I think
Exactly, especially on.
Michael, love to see the meeting.
Corbin was most intrigued.
This is being recorded. Any questions from the gallery?
Well, I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, do we have photographic evidence?
We do. Right.
Where's the press when you need them?
Thank you. Move to Bahongana and Councillor Marsh.
Oh, now I'm behind. Sorry.
Michael in here.
Yep. 93. I would imagine it would have been old, this one. Yes, April. No, they had a meeting last night around the use of their AEDs machines, which was great. Other than that, there's not a heck of a lot to report other than what's in front of you.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Campbell and Worship both away, so anyone that was present at the Halcombe meeting. Councillor Short, volunteer.
Looking for it. Which date was it?
Page 104.
Right, I'm a bit behind. Thanks. Oh, was it that one? Yeah, just ticking along at the moment. And the skateboard project is the Rangitia Lions Club who've agreed to be the project sponsor. So just working through that at the moment. I didn't actually make the last meeting because I was stuck at home with the vid, but Andrew went. I don't know if there's anything that came out last time, Andrew, worth a mention.
There is one issue in regard to a footpath, making it straight rather than crossing the road to come back across to the main road, but I'll talk to Hamish about that after the meeting.
Thank you. If you can stay on your feet, because we moved to Sanson.
Yeah, there's a couple of issues, and I'll talk to Lynn in regard to that. One is the rubbish around the new playground that they've got. There's a rubbish accumulating at the back of it, and the second is that they'd like security cameras on the playground, and I was wondering if that was possible. I think they'd lost some stuff there, gone all about, and the speed signs. I'll talk to Hamish about that.
Thank you. Councillor Belsky, we're moving to Apathy. Anything to report?
Yeah, no, Apathy's ticking along. They've got their projects planned for their coming expenditure, and they're welcome to Apathy Signs making good progress. Overall, no, things are ticking along good at Apathy. Just an update on Waituna, they had a meeting last Wednesday. It was postponed till this Wednesday, and then it was postponed till next Wednesday, and I won't be there that evening. So thanks to Andrew filling in for me for Waituna, but I think they're ticking along good too. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Tangi Moana, Councillor Short.
A small but dedicated group there at the moment. They're putting a lot of focus on the hall. Just one comment that came out, perhaps I can aim towards Hamish and communications, the large item rubbish collection, whatever the proper name of that is. It was advertised through social media, I guess, and on their page only about the Wednesday of the day before it was collected. There was just comment that, I mean, I know there's other places you can find that information, but it would be quite good to circulate it. They've got a very good following on their village Facebook page. If it could go on there like 10 days before or something, just because there's a lot of holiday home owners who probably wouldn't get there till the Saturday, and it's been collected on the Saturday. So for a bit more notice, they'd appreciate just through those less formal channels.
That's normally the Rangitia Yarra collection.
Oh, the rubbish.
Thank you. Councillor Casey, Bainesi Ringiatu.
Look, as you've just seen, I mean, it was the focus in the last couple of months has been getting the community plan organised, but also too, last night's discussion was around the city to sea cycleway. I think it's got some real merits if you line it up against the Otago Rail Trail and the benefits out of that. It's just a long-winded exercise. It will take some time, but certainly as long as I can stay in council, will be the encouragement for them to continue with that. Excuse the pun, down the path.
Thank you. You're welcome. Right, and Humatangi Councillor Campbell, there's no one else in attendance here today that was there then, so we'll keep moving. Which probably means there's a resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move to accept the minutes from the community committees.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Short. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Contrary, carried. Thanks very much. Right, so no consideration of late items, so we're going to move into public excluded for a very short time, I would think.
Stop recording. No, pass the resolution phase before I'm allowed to start recording.
Also move.
We move that we move into public excluded. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Short. Any discussion? All those in favour, please raise your hand. Contrary, carried.